Hello and welcome to another one of our Brexit Explain videos. In this one we're going to be taking a look at what might be Boris Johnson's secret Brexit plan, which has been given the catchy title, the Hungarian veto. Just a quick plug before we get into it though. We've mentioned a few times, but we have a whole bunch of countries with shoes badges available on our store. The full list of countries is on the screen now, and most of them are in stock at the moment and ready to ship pretty much immediately, which means that if you've placed a pre-order in the last month or so, it should ship imminently. Some of our badges are already running low on stock, so be sure to act fast in order to avoid disappointment. All Patreon backers on silver tier and above can get a discount on the store, so do DM us on Patreon if you want the code. So if you haven't been keeping up with the latest Brexit drama, and at this point we really can't blame you if you haven't been, Boris Johnson has been constantly making cryptic comments about how the UK is going to have left the EU by the 31st of October. That's despite the fact that he's legally required to ask for an extension by the Benn Act, and that his new deal doesn't look likely that it's going to be accepted by the EU, especially not by the 31st. Lots of people concluded from this that if he wasn't going to ask for an extension, then Johnson must be intending to break the law and ignore the Benn Act, especially given that he said that he'd rather be dead in a ditch than ask for an extension. How else could he guarantee leaving the EU by the 31st, given that the EU seemed to have rejected his deal and that he's legally obligated to ask the EU for an extension if nothing's agreed by mid-October? However, on Friday, the government published legal papers to the Court of Session in Edinburgh. This was in response to legal action brought by campaigners trying to ensure that Johnson follows the Benn Act. In these papers, the government unequivocally committed to complying with the Benn Act. The campaigners started the legal proceedings because they were worried that Johnson might have been planning to break the law, and wanted to guarantee that this wasn't the case. Although the government has refused to publicly release any of the documents submitted in the case, key excerpts were read out by Aidan McNeil QC, the lawyer representing the campaigners, including one quote which said, "Johnson is subject to the public law principle that he cannot frustrate its purpose or the purpose of its provisions. Thus he cannot act so as to prevent the letter requesting the specified action in the Act from being sent." So if Johnson and the government know that they can't just ignore the Benn Act, how can they be so sure that the UK is going to leave by the 31st of October? Why is Dominic Cummings seemingly so confident that all of this is going to plan? Well, there's one other way that they can be sure of leaving on the 31st, if they know that the extension request will be turned down by the EU. To most people, this seems unlikely. While some EU member states, perhaps most notably France, are getting a bit fed up of Brexit and aren't particularly keen for another extension, it still seems very unlikely that they'll actually veto any extension request. This is for a few reasons, but primarily the EU doesn't want to be blamed for a no deal. If they decline an extension, and a no deal is an absolute disaster, then the UK and Johnson can just turn around and say that the big bad EU forced this upon us. Perhaps we're being pessimistic, but it's for the same reason they're being so kind to Johnson's deal. Johnson's deal, while pretty creative and potentially a good starting point, as it is, crosses some EU red lines. It suggests some immediate divergence between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland on customs, and probably some regulatory divergence in 4 years' time. But no checks on the border and no proper plan for technological solutions or alternative arrangements. This obviously threatens the integrity of the single market, but the EU haven't completely rubbished it because they don't want to seem inflexible and so be blamed when negotiations break down. As well as this concern, the EU knows that an election in the UK seems pretty much inevitable at the moment. This means that it won't just be another pointless extension like the last one. Instead, it will give the UK time to hold a general election, which might change the parliamentary arithmetic enough to break the Brexit deadlock. So that's why most political commentators assume that the EU would grant an extension. However, with Johnson and Cummings still sounding optimistic about leaving on the 31st, even though they've admitted to court that they have to ask for an extension under the Benn Act, there's been growing suspicion that they might be relying on an EU member state to veto the extension. This is because any extension needs to be unanimously approved by the EU, so if they persuade even one member state to vote against it, then it's game over. An obvious contender for this has always been Viktor Orban's Hungary. Forgive us for the caricaturing, but Orban is deeply Eurosceptic, happy to play political games, and as a Central European country with no significant trade links to the UK, Hungary is well insulated from the worst effects of a no-deal Brexit. This was all speculation until Thursday, when the Hungarian foreign minister and ambassador were filmed leaving the cabinet office at the same time as Johnson was holding an emergency cabinet meeting. And they were probably only spotted by the media because the backdoor exit, where they could have escaped without any press, was blocked by Extinction Rebellion, who were spraying fake blood all over the street. Obviously, this isn't 100% conclusive. They might have been there to talk about non-Brexit related matters. But given how close we are to Brexit crunch time, it would be pretty weird for Johnson to hold an emergency cabinet meeting about anything else but Brexit. Also, if this was their secret plan, it would explain why Johnson and the government have been so certain about leaving on the 31st. It's a pretty good secret plan from their point of view, because it gets around the Benn Act, and there's nothing that Parliament can do to stop it. Anyway, like most of these things, only time will tell, so stay tuned and we'll bring out another video when we know more. The one way to make sure that you don't miss a thing is by subscribing to our channel. You can also hit the bell icon if you want to be notified every time we release a video. And if you want more from us, you can find TLDR across all social networks simply by searching for TLDR News. And if you want your name featured at the end of the videos, just like these people, then you can sign up to back us on Patreon. There's a link to that in the description.